Fear has a color. For me, it will always be the deep blood red of the flame from that candle, the one that began appearing outside my bedroom door every Sunday evening. It was a signal, an omen. It was the beginning of my own private, weekly hell. Hello. My name is Deborah, and I am 83 years old now. My life has been a long and sometimes painful road, but it has also been filled with small victories, the kind you have to fight for with everything you have inside you. I was born in a small, quiet town in Ohio, in an America that was still trying to find its footing after the war. It was a different time, a different country than the one we know today. It was a place where certain troubles, certain pains, were kept locked away behind closed doors, smothered by a thick blanket of silence and shame. It was the era when America was rebuilding itself, brick by brick, dream by dream, and I was just 15 when my own world fell to pieces. Before the world broke, it was simple and it was good. My father was a carpenter, a kind and gentle man whose hands, though calloused and rough from his work, could fix anything. He smelled of sawdust and quiet strength. Our small home wasn't grand, but with him in it, we never felt like we were missing a thing. His workshop in the garage was my favorite place on earth. It was our family's pride, a testament to honest work in a town that respected a man who could create something beautiful and strong from a simple piece of wood. He was known throughout the county for his skill, but to me, he was just Dad. He was the one who taught me how to find constellations in the summer sky, the one who patiently removed a splinter from my finger, the one whose steady presence made me feel like nothing bad could ever truly happen. Then, one autumn, something bad did happen. A cough turned into a fever, and the fever turned into pneumonia. The doctor came and went, his face grim. My mother, Brenda, boiled broths and placed cool cloths on his forehead, her prayers filling the quiet rooms of our house. But it wasn't enough. My father, the strong man who could build a house from the ground up, died suddenly, leaving a silence so vast it felt like the world had stopped turning. I remember the day of his funeral with a startling clarity. The sky wept with us, a cold, thin drizzle that seemed as though it would never end. The whole town came to pay their respects, filling the small church until people had to stand in the back. They spoke in hushed tones about what a good man he was, how he'd be missed. But their words were just noise against the roaring grief in my ears. My mother was a ghost, her body moving through the motions, but her spirit utterly shattered. She had never worked a day outside our home. Her whole life had been dedicated to my father and me. Suddenly, she was a widow with a daughter to raise and no idea how to do it. In those days, a woman in her position was an object of pity and sometimes even suspicion. There weren't many opportunities for a woman to start over, especially not one without a trade or a college education. "How are we going to make it, Deborah?" she would whisper late at night when she thought I was asleep in my room across the hall. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening to the sound of her quiet sobs, her prayers to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. That period was the hardest of my life. Our savings, meager as they were, vanished in a matter of months. The bills piled up on the kitchen table, an ever-present reminder of our desperation. My mother had to sell the workshop. It broke my heart to see his tools, each one holding a memory, sold off for pennies on the dollar. She tried to keep the business going, but the men in town, men my father had known for years, just shook their heads. "That's no work for a woman," they'd say, with the unshakable certainty of men who had never had to question their place in the world. No one offered to teach her, to help her manage the orders. So the heart of our family was dismantled and sold, and with it went the last echo of my father's presence. It was in that suffocating fog of despair that Roger entered our lives. He was a man in his 40s, a widower with no children of his own. He had a respectable job as the town clerk and lived in a nice house on the other side of town, bigger and newer than ours. We'd seen him around, of course. In a town that small, you knew everyone's face, but we didn't really know him. He started coming around a few months after Dad died. At first, it was just small kindnesses. A bag of groceries left on our porch, a box of donuts for me, an offer to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen. My mother, starved for any sign of help or adult companionship, seemed to bloom in his presence. For the first time in months, I heard her laugh again, a sound that was both wonderful and painful to hear. She started making plans, talking about the future in a way she hadn't since the funeral. I remember the first time he stayed for dinner. I felt a strange, unsettling sensation the entire evening. It wasn't dislike, not yet. It was something more subtle, more primal, like the way the air grows heavy and still right before a thunderstorm, long before you see the clouds. It was the way he looked at me. There was an intensity in his gaze, an attention that felt too focused, too heavy, and it made my skin crawl. But I was just a teenager, raw with grief. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that I was just resentful of any man who tried to take my father's place. I wonder if any of you listening have ever seen someone you love change for a man, becoming smaller to fit into the life he offered. It's a quiet kind of heartbreak, isn't it? Watching my mother with Roger, I saw her slowly transforming. She started dressing differently, speaking more softly, deferring to his opinions on everything from politics to the weather. She was so desperate for the safety he represented that she seemed willing to erase parts of herself to keep it. About 6 months after he first appeared at our door, my mother took my hands in hers one evening. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Deborah," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Roger has asked me to marry him. He said he'll take care of us both." I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt a wave of profound relief. It meant we wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. It meant my mother might stop crying herself to sleep every night. But another part of me, the part I didn't understand yet, was trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Are you happy, Mom?" I asked. "He's a good man," she replied, not quite answering my question. "He'll give us security, and he says he's very fond of you." The wedding was a small, hurried affair at the local courthouse, with no celebration to follow. "Out of respect for your father's memory," my mother said, but I knew it was also because we couldn't afford a real wedding. I wore my best dress and forced a smile for the camera, trying to be happy for her. Roger was polite and attentive throughout the ceremony, a perfect gentleman. We moved into his house that same week. It was larger and cleaner than our old one, in a nicer part of town with manicured lawns and freshly painted fences. He gave me my own room, with a new bed and a desk for my schoolwork. On the surface, it looked like the beginning of a better life. For a few weeks, everything was calm. Roger was reserved but courteous. He bought my mother gifts, and sometimes brought home a new book for me. He would ask about my classes, feigning an interest in my studies. But that feeling, that deep, gut-level wrongness, never went away. It was there every time I found his eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. Then, one Sunday, things changed. My mother announced that she was going to the evening church service. This was new. We had always gone together on Sunday mornings. But Roger had mentioned that he preferred to have the house to himself in the morning, to read the paper in peace. My mother, so eager to please him, had immediately changed her lifelong habit. "Are you coming with me, Deborah?" she asked me that afternoon. Before I could answer, Roger stepped in, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Let her rest, Brenda. She's been buried in school books all week. The girl needs a break. I'll keep an eye on her." My mother hesitated for a second, a flicker of uncertainty on her face, but then she smiled. "All right. I'll be back in time for supper." The moment the front door clicked shut behind her, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The air grew thick and heavy, with a silence that was full of unspoken things. I quickly retreated to my room, saying I had homework to finish. It was a lie. I'd finished it all on Friday. I just needed to be alone, to put a closed door between myself and him. I was trying to lose myself in a novel when I heard a sound in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. A pause. Then, a faint, unfamiliar scent drifted under my door, the smell of melting wax. Overcome with curiosity, I cracked my door open just enough to peer out. And that's when I saw it. A single red candle, lit and placed carefully on the floor, right in front of my door. Roger was standing a few feet away, just watching it, his back to me. When he heard the faint creak of my door, he turned. He was smiling, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Do you know what a red candle means, Deborah?" he asked, and his voice was different from any voice I had ever heard from him before. It was low, almost a whisper, and it slithered into my ears like a snake. I shook my head, my throat suddenly too tight to speak. "It means it's time for a girl to become a woman," he said, taking a slow step toward my door. "Your mother is out. It's just you and me. It's time you learned about the things that happen between a man and a woman." In that single horrifying instant, I understood everything. The unease, the crawling sensation on my skin, the feeling of a gathering storm. It hadn't been my imagination. It was my instinct, screaming at me to run, and I hadn't listened. I tried to slam the door shut, but he was faster, stronger. His hand shot out and blocked it, and he began to push it open, slowly, deliberately. "Don't make a sound," he whispered in that same terrible voice. "It won't do you any good. Who do you think they'll believe? A troubled little girl or a respected man like me? Your mother needs me, Deborah. She needs my money. Do you really think she would choose you over this life I've given her?" The blood in my veins turned to ice. He was right. I knew he was right. We were trapped, completely dependent on his generosity. My mother had finally found stability, a reason to smile again. I was just a girl. Who would believe me? "If you say one word," he continued, his face close to mine now, "I'll make sure something terrible happens to your mother." It would be a tragedy, wouldn't it? And where would you two go then? Back to being poor? Back to starving? Are you willing to do that to her? His threats were like surgical instruments, precise and sharp, aimed at the places where I was most vulnerable. And they worked. I was paralyzed by terror, by the impossible choice he had laid before me. That evening, I remained silent as he pushed his way into my room. The red flame of the candle in the hallway flickered and danced, casting monstrous, elongated shadows on the walls of my new bedroom. I won't speak of the details of what happened that night, or on the many Sundays that followed. The pain, the shame, the feeling of being utterly powerless. These are things I have spent a lifetime trying to bury. What I can tell you is that when my mother returned from church, humming a hymn, I was back in my room, curled into a tight ball on my bed, unable to cry, unable to feel anything at all. The candle was gone, as if it had never existed, but its smell, mingled with his scent, lingered in the air. It was a smell I would learn to dread more than anything else in the world. That first night, I didn't sleep. I lay perfectly still, staring at the unfamiliar patterns the moonlight made on the ceiling, convinced that if I moved, my body would shatter into a million pieces. The house was silent again, but to me, it was screaming. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window was him. The air was thick with his presence, his scent, and the ghost smell of burnt wax. I replayed his words over and over in my mind, each one a nail in the coffin of my childhood. Who do you think they'll believe? Your mother needs me. Do you really think she would choose you? I thought of my mother, sleeping peacefully in her room down the hall, her smile finally returned, her life finally secure. I thought of the poverty we had just clawed our way out of, the gnawing hunger, the constant grinding fear of tomorrow. And I knew, with the cold, hard certainty of a survivor, that he was right. In our small town, in that era, a man like Roger was a pillar of the community. A troubled, grieving teenage girl was just trouble. To speak up wouldn't be just an accusation against him. It would be an act of destruction against my mother. And so, in the lonely darkness of that room, I made a choice. I would bury it. I would carry this terrible new weight alone. The next morning was the most difficult performance of my life. I walked into the kitchen to find my mother humming as she made pancakes, and Roger sitting at the table, reading the newspaper as if nothing had happened. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "Morning, Deborah," he said, his voice the same calm, respectable tone everyone in town knew. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. My mother turned from the stove, her face bright and carefree. "You're just in time," she said cheerfully. "Sleep well?" I could only nod, the words lodged in my throat like stones. I sat down and forced myself to eat a few bites of the pancakes that tasted like ash in my mouth. I avoided looking at him, focusing on the floral pattern of the tablecloth, tracing it with my eyes until it blurred. He and my mother chatted about trivial things, the weather, town gossip, plans for the week. It was surreal. It was as if I had stepped into a different dimension, one where the night before had never happened. I was an actress in a play I never wanted to be in, and I knew that forgetting my lines could have devastating consequences. That first week set the pattern for the year that followed. Life was divided into two distinct parts. There was the performance of Monday through Saturday, where I went to school, did my chores, and pretended to be the same quiet girl I had always been. And then there was the dread that began to build around Thursday, a cold knot tightening in my stomach as Sunday crept closer. By Saturday night, the anxiety was a physical thing, a sickness that left me unable to eat. And then came Sunday. The morning was filled with a tense, brittle cheerfulness. But as the afternoon sun began to sink, a heavy silence would fall over the house. My mother would get ready for her evening service, and the clock on the mantel would tick louder and louder, each tick a hammer blow against my sanity. The moment she left, the ritual would begin, the sound of his footsteps in the hall, the scratch of a match, and then the red candle would appear outside my door, its flame a silent, monstrous announcement. It became a perverse clock, marking the weeks of my life with its terrible rhythm. At school, the girl who had once loved learning disappeared. I couldn't focus. The words on the pages of my books would swim before my eyes, meaningless squiggles. My grades, once a source of pride for both me and my parents, began to plummet. I would sit in class, staring out the window, my mind a million miles away, trapped in a cycle of fear and memory. My friends noticed the change. "What's wrong, Debbie?" my best friend Judy asked me one day after school. "You're so quiet lately. You never want to come to the soda shop with us anymore." I saw the genuine concern in her eyes, and for a heart-stopping moment, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to collapse into her arms and let the whole ugly, terrible story spill out. But how could I? What would I even say? My secret felt like a disease, something so shameful that even speaking its name would contaminate everything around me. So I just shrugged and mumbled something about being tired. "I'm fine," I lied. She looked hurt, confused by my sudden coldness. After a few more attempts to reach me, she, like everyone else, eventually stopped trying. I had become an island, and the waters around me were too dark and dangerous for anyone to cross. I was utterly alone, adrift in my own silent ocean of shame. I lost weight. Dark, bruised circles formed under my eyes from the endless, sleepless nights. I moved through my days like a ghost, a shadow of the girl I used to be, and I was convinced no one could see the real reason for my fading. But someone did. My English teacher, Mrs. Davis, was a sharp, kind woman who saw more than most. She had been my favorite teacher, the one who had encouraged my love of reading. One afternoon, she asked me to stay behind after class. The other students filed out, their cheerful chatter fading down the hallway, leaving us in the quiet, sun-drenched classroom that smelled of chalk dust and old books. "Is everything all right, Deborah?" she asked, her voice gentle. She wasn't looking at me with pity, but with a clear-eyed concern that was almost more than I could bear. "I know it's been a hard year since you lost your father. I've noticed you seem very sad lately." I wanted to tell her. Oh, how I wanted to scream it until my lungs burned. The words were right there, a physical pressure building in my chest, clawing at my throat. But the moment I opened my mouth, Roger's face appeared in my mind, his voice whispering his threats. "Who will they believe? Think of your mother." The words died before they could be born. I just shook my head, staring at my shoes, and mumbled a half-hearted excuse. She didn't press me. Instead, she said something that would become a tiny, flickering light in my all-consuming darkness. "Well," she said softly, "if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here, whatever it is." Whatever it is. Those 3 words. She didn't know what it was, of course, but she had suspected it was something more than just grief. She had offered me a safe harbor, a lifeline, and even though I was too terrified to grab it then, just knowing it was there kept me from drowning in the months that followed. An entire year passed like that. A year of Sundays, a year of sleepless nights and hollow days, a year of being a stranger in my own skin. My mother seemed happy. She had settled into her new life, her role as Mrs. Roger Nelson. She hosted small dinner parties for his colleagues from the town hall and joined the local ladies' garden club. She had the security she had so desperately craved, and if she noticed that her daughter was wasting away before her very eyes, she never said a word. Or perhaps, I began to realize, with a new, dawning horror, she chose not to notice. Maybe, in some deep, hidden corner of her heart, she knew. Maybe she saw the shadows under my eyes and the way I flinched whenever Roger entered a room. Maybe she saw the joy drain out of me, leaving behind a hollow-eyed doll. But seeing would have required action. Seeing would have meant confronting the man who paid the bills, the man who kept her safe from the poverty that haunted her nightmares. It was easier not to see, more comfortable. And that thought was a betrayal sharper and more painful than anything Roger could ever do to me. I felt myself slipping away. The anger I had felt initially had cooled into a dull, gray resignation. I was dying inside, slowly and quietly, like a plant deprived of sunlight. I started to think that maybe it would be better if I just disappeared completely. It was when I reached that bottomless point of despair, when I was sure I couldn't endure one more Sunday, that everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was home from school, alone in the house. My mother was at her garden club meeting, and Roger was at work. I was in the living room, searching the large, built-in bookshelf for a copy of Jane Eyre for a school report. As I ran my fingers along the spines of the books on the top shelf, my hand brushed against a heavy cardboard box tucked away behind a set of old encyclopedias. It tilted, and before I could catch it, it tumbled to the floor, spilling its contents across the hardwood. Annoyed, and fearing Roger's anger if he found anything out of place, I knelt to quickly gather the scattered items. There were old photographs, bundles of letters tied with ribbon, small, forgotten trinkets. It was a box of memories. As I was stuffing everything back inside, my eyes fell on a single envelope, separate from the rest. The letter was addressed to Roger, but the handwriting on the envelope was instantly, painfully familiar. It was my mother's. I knew I shouldn't read it. It felt like a violation, a step into a place I wasn't meant to be. But some force, some desperate need to understand, was stronger than my sense of propriety. My hands trembled as I pulled the folded pages from the envelope, and as I read the words my mother had written, the blood in my veins turned to ice. The letter began, "Dear Roger, I need to talk to you about Deborah. I've noticed such a change in her these past months." My heart hammered against my ribs. I read on. "She was always such a happy, bright girl, so full of life. Now, she is like a little ghost. She hardly eats, she never smiles, and I hear her crying in her room at night. I know she misses her father, but this is more than grief. I found stains on her bedsheets the other day when I was changing them. I'm so afraid of what it might mean. Please, tell me it isn't what I fear. Tell me I can trust you with my daughter. Tell me that I haven't made a terrible, terrible mistake." I looked at the bottom of the last page. The letter was dated. It had been written 3 months ago. 3 months. For 3 months my own mother had suspected. She had feared the unthinkable. She had put her terror into words, written it down on paper, and then she had done nothing. She had chosen to believe his lies, or worse, she had chosen to ignore the truth because it was too inconvenient. The proof was right here in my hands. The life raft I thought I was preserving for her, the happiness I was sacrificing myself for, was built on a foundation of her willful blindness. In that moment, something inside me shattered. But it wasn't my spirit. It was the last of my despair. It was the silence. The hopelessness that had been my constant companion for a year evaporated, and in its place, a new feeling began to grow. It was a cold, hard, and powerful rage. My mother would not protect me. Roger was a monster. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted to survive, I would have to save myself. I knelt on the floor of the living room, my mother's letter clutched in my hand, the world silent except for the frantic drumming of my own heart. The flimsy pages felt as heavy as stone, a verdict of a crime I hadn't known how to name. Betrayal. My mother, my own mother, had suspected and had chosen comfort over her child. The knowledge didn't break me. It forged what was left of my grief and fear into something new, something hard and sharp. Anger. For the first time in a year, I felt a flicker of power. It was the terrible, lonely power of knowing you have absolutely nothing left to lose. With hands that were surprisingly steady, I folded the letter and slid it back into its envelope. I carefully placed it back in the box, arranging the other trinkets and photographs around it, making it look as if it had never been disturbed. I pushed the box back into its hiding place behind the encyclopedias, my movements precise and deliberate. I was no longer a victim drifting toward oblivion. I was a girl with a purpose. I had to get out. But more than that, I had to make sure he could never, ever do this to anyone again. My mind raced, sorting through the fog of my fear, and landed on a single point of light. 3 words spoken in a quiet classroom. Whatever it is, Mrs. Davis. The next day at school was an exercise in extreme self-control. I sat through my classes, pretending to listen, pretending to take notes, while a silent scream built inside me. The final bell felt like a starting gun. My heart pounded as I watched the other students pour out of the English classroom, their laughter and chatter a world away from the cold reality I inhabited. I waited until the hallway was nearly empty before I stepped back inside. Mrs. Davis was at her desk, grading papers. She looked up as I approached, and her face broke into a warm, welcoming smile. "Deborah," she said, "what a nice surprise. Did you forget something?" My carefully constructed composure crumbled. I stood before her desk, unable to speak, my body trembling. "I need help," I finally whispered, and the sound of my own voice, raw and broken, unleashed the floodgates. The story I had held inside me for a year came pouring out in a torrent of gasps and sobs. I told her everything. I told her about the Sundays, about the heavy silence in the house, about the smell of wax. I told her about the red candle, the terrible symbol of my weekly torture. I told her about his threats, how he had used my mother's dependence and his own reputation as a cage to keep me silent. And then I told her about the letter that proved my mother knew, or at least had chosen not to know. Throughout it all, Mrs. Davis just listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look shocked or disbelieving. She simply listened, her own eyes filling with tears, her hands clasped tightly on her desk. When my voice finally gave out, when I was left gasping for breath, hollowed out by my own story, she didn't say a word. She stood up, walked around her desk, and wrapped her arms around me. She held me as I sobbed, a kind of deep, ragged crying I hadn't allowed myself since my father died. It was the cry of a girl who had finally been heard. "I believe you," she whispered into my hair, and those 3 words were the most powerful thing anyone had ever said to me. "Deborah, I believe every word, and I am going to help you. You are not alone in this anymore. You are not alone." We sat for a long time in the quiet of that empty classroom, the late afternoon sun slanting through the tall windows. When my tears had finally subsided, Mrs. Davis pulled back, her expression now grim but resolute. "We won't say anything. Not yet," she said, her voice firm. "First, we have to make sure you are safe." I didn't understand. I had just told her the most monstrous secret imaginable. Why would we wait? "But Mrs. Davis, I can't go back to that house," I pleaded. "I can't face another Sunday." She took my hands in hers. They were warm and strong. "Deborah, listen to me very carefully. You have to understand the world we live in. Roger is a respected man. He has connections at the town hall. Your mother has chosen, for whatever reason, to ignore this. If we go to the sheriff right now, with no proof, it becomes your word against his. They might not believe you. They might think you're a troubled girl making up stories, and if they do, he will know you talked. It could become much, much worse for you." A cold dread washed over me. She was right. I knew it with a certainty that ached in my bones. We were living in a world where a man's reputation was a fortress, and a girl's truth was a whisper in the wind. "What do we do then?" I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted, years older than my 16 years. "The letter you mentioned. Your mother's letter," she said, her mind working. "Do you still have it?" I shook my head. I put it back. I was terrified he would know I'd been through his things. "That letter is proof," she said. "It proves your mother had suspicions. It cracks the foundation of his story. We need that letter, Deborah, or anything else you can find that shows what he's been doing." "And then what?" "Then we get you out of there," she said, her voice full of conviction. "I have a cousin in Chicago who might be able to put you up for a while. But we should also try to contact a relative of yours, someone on your father's side, or your mother's, who will stand up for you, someone who can't be dismissed." I thought hard. My father's parents were long gone. My mother's lived in another state, and we rarely saw them. But there was one person. "My Aunt Kathleen," I said, a spark of hope igniting. "My mother's sister. They had a falling out years ago, but she always loved me. She used to send me cards and letters in secret, even after she and Mom stopped speaking." Mrs. Davis nodded, her expression brightening. "Perfect. Do you have an address for her?" "Yes," I said. "I keep it hidden in my diary." "Good," she said. "Here's the plan. I will write to your aunt. It's better if the letter comes from my address, in case Roger checks your mail. While we wait for her reply, you will have to be incredibly brave. You will have to go home and act as if nothing has changed. And you will look for that letter, or any other proof you can find. Can you do that?" I nodded, feeling a tremor of fear but also a surge of purpose. I had a mission. "One last thing, Deborah," Mrs. Davis said as I prepared to leave. She wrote her address on a slip of paper and pressed it into my hand. If you ever, for any reason, feel you are in immediate danger, you come straight to my house. I don't care what time it is, day or night. My door will always be open for you. For the first time in over a year, I felt a genuine flicker of hope. I wasn't alone with my secret anymore. Someone believed me. Someone was fighting for me. The next few days were a special kind of torment. I was living a double life, playing the part of the submissive, frightened girl at home, while my mind was constantly scheming, waiting for an opportunity. The house, which had once been a prison, was now a battlefield. Every moment was fraught with tension. Roger seemed to sense the shift in me. He watched me more closely than ever, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "How is that teacher of yours, that Mrs. Davis?" he asked one evening at the dinner table, his tone deceptively casual. My heart skipped a beat. "She's fine," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. "She keeps you after class a lot, doesn't she?" I didn't know if he was guessing or if he'd seen us. "Sometimes," I said, my palms sweating. "About my grades. She knows they've slipped." Roger smiled that cold smile of his and turned to my mother. "Don't you think Deborah is becoming a bit of a handful, Brenda? So withdrawn, so secretive. Maybe we ought to have a talk with this teacher, find out what's really going on at school." My mother looked up from her plate, her brow furrowed with mild concern. "Do you think there's a problem?" "Who can say?" Roger said, looking directly at me now. "Girls at this age can be difficult. They invent stories, create drama to get attention." His eyes bored into mine. "Isn't that right, Deborah?" It was a threat, clear and sharp. He was already poisoning the well, already building his narrative against me, ensuring that if I spoke, no one would believe me. That night, I knew my time was running out. My chance came 2 days later. My mother had a doctor's appointment, and Roger had to work late at the town hall. I had the house to myself for a few precious hours. The moment their car pulled away, I went straight to the bookshelf in the living room. The box was still there. With trembling hands, I took it down and opened it. My mother's letter was right where I'd left it. But I didn't stop there. I dug deeper. I found more letters, a whole series of them from my mother, each one more worried than the last. And I found Roger's replies, tucked into a separate folder. They were masterpieces of manipulation. "It's just teenage hormones, Brenda," he wrote in one. "All girls go through this difficult phase. You're worrying for nothing. Trust me, I know how to handle her." But then, under a false bottom in the box, I found something else, something that made me feel physically ill. I found a collection of photographs. They were pictures of other girls, all of them young, around my age. They weren't explicit pictures, but there was something deeply disturbing about them. The girls were in everyday settings, in a park, walking home from school, and they seemed unaware they were being photographed. On the back of a few, there were names and dates written in Roger's neat, controlled handwriting. With a wave of cold horror, I realized the truth. I was not the first. He had done this before. He was a predator, and I was just the latest name on his list. I took the most damning of the letters and 2 of the photographs, hiding them between the pages of my history textbook. I put everything else back exactly as I had found it, my heart pounding with fear and a strange, grim sense of validation. The next day, I gave the evidence to Mrs. Davis. I watched as she read the letters and looked at the photographs, her face growing pale, her hands beginning to shake. "This is," she stammered, looking up at me, her eyes wide with horror. "This is so much worse than I imagined. You're not the only one, Deborah. This changes everything." As if on cue, she handed me a letter that had arrived for her that morning. It was from my Aunt Kathleen. "Come at once," the letter read. "My door is open for Deborah. I always suspected something was wrong with that man, and Brenda wouldn't listen. It doesn't matter what happened between me and my sister. My niece will not suffer one more day under that roof." The plan was set. I would leave on Saturday. I would tell my mother and Roger that I was going on a weekend field trip with the school's history club, a trip that Mrs. Davis would help me fabricate. She would drive me to the bus station in the next town over and make sure I got on the bus to Chicago. The hope was so real I could almost taste it. Freedom was just 2 days away. On Thursday evening, I was in my room, discreetly packing a small bag with a few essentials, when I heard the front door slam open with a force that shook the house. Heavy, furious footsteps pounded up the stairs. My bedroom door was thrown open with such violence that it crashed against the wall. Roger stood in the doorway, his face a mask of pure rage. He was holding a piece of paper, an envelope. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he hissed, shaking the letter in his hand. It was the letter from Aunt Kathleen. "Did you really think you were smarter than me?" My blood ran cold. He knew. Through a friend who worked at the post office, he had intercepted my one chance at escape. He knew everything. The room spun around me as I backed away from him, my back hitting the cold wall. There was nowhere left to run. "Did you really think you were smarter than me?" The words hung in the air of my small bedroom, cold and sharp as glass. Roger stood in the doorway, the intercepted letter from my Aunt Kathleen, a white flag of surrender in his hand. But he was not the one surrendering. He was the victor, and his face was a terrifying mixture of triumph and pure rage. My escape plan, my meticulously constructed hope, had crumbled to dust in an instant. I was trapped. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. I scrambled backward until my back hit the cold wall, my breath catching in my throat. There was nowhere to run. "A school field trip," he said with a low, mocking chuckle. "Really, Deborah? Did you and that meddling teacher cook that one up together? It's pathetic." He took another step closer. "You've been a busy little girl, haven't you? Spreading your vicious little lies, trying to turn people against me, against the man who took you and your mother in when you had nothing." "They aren't lies," I said, my voice a strangled whisper. I was terrified, but the anger that had been simmering inside me for days refused to be extinguished. "And I have proof." A flicker of something, uncertainty, fear, crossed his eyes for a barest second, and then it was gone, replaced by his chilling confidence. "Proof?" he sneered. "You have nothing. You have the fantasies of a troubled girl and the ramblings of a lonely old teacher and a bitter old aunt your own mother can't stand. Who do you think that weighs against? Me? A respected man in this town? A man who serves on the community board? A widower who generously opened his home to a helpless family?" He was close enough now that I could smell the faint scent of coffee on his breath. "Let me tell you what's going to happen now," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are going to stop this foolishness. Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to go to your school. We are going to have a meeting with your principal, and you are going to tell him everything." My blood ran cold. "You're going to tell him," he continued, his eyes boring into mine, "that you've been unstable since your father's death. You're going to tell him you've been confused, that you developed an unhealthy obsession with me, the new man in your mother's life. You'll say you started inventing stories to get attention, and that your teacher, Mrs. Davis, instead of helping you, encouraged your delusions. You will apologize for all the trouble you've caused." "I won't," I choked out. "They won't believe you." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Oh, but they will, Deborah. They will. Do you know why? Because it's easier. It's always easier to believe a teenage girl is hysterical than to believe a respectable man is a monster. It's tidier. It doesn't upset the natural order of things. People will shake their heads and feel sorry for me, for what I have to put up with. And they will feel sorry for your poor mother." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping even lower. "And what about your mother? Do you really think she'll choose you? The daughter who wants to drag her back into poverty and shame? Or will she choose me, the man who gives her this nice house, this comfortable life? He paused, letting the cruel words sink in. She's already made her choice, Deborah. Every single day for the past year, she has chosen not to see. She chose me long ago. His words were poison, designed to paralyze me, to sever my last remaining ties to hope. And they almost worked. The thought of my mother, siding with him, believing his lies, was a pain so profound it stole the air from my lungs. "So, here is your choice," he said, straightening up. "You can do as I say tomorrow morning, and we can put all this ugliness behind us. Or," his eyes hardened, "I will be forced to protect my family and my reputation by any means necessary, and I assure you, you will not like the means I consider necessary." He didn't need to elaborate. The threat hung in the air, suffocating and absolute. "You have until morning to decide," he said. "Choose wisely." He turned and left, and I heard the key turn in the lock on the outside of my door. I was a prisoner. I sank to the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. It was over. He had won. He had anticipated my every move, cut off my every escape route, all my planning, all of Mrs. Davis's courage, all of Aunt Kathleen's kindness. It was all for nothing, undone by a tattletale at the post office. A wave of despair so complete, so black, washed over me that I thought it would drown me. For a few minutes, I just knelt on the floor in the dark, hollowed out and empty. But then, something else rose up through the despair. It was the image of his triumphant, smiling face. The image of the red candle. The memory of a year of silent screams, and the cold, hard rage returned, burning away the hopelessness. No, I would not go to the principal. I would not let him destroy Mrs. Davis. I would not let him win. I would not wait for morning. I would not wait for his terms. If I was going down, I was going down fighting. I decided then and there. I was leaving tonight. My mind, suddenly clear and sharp, began to work. He thought he had me trapped, but he didn't know the things a bored and lonely child learns. Years ago, my father had shown me how the simple locks on our interior doors could be jiggled open with a bobby pin. A silly, innocent game back then. Now, it was the key to my survival. I scrambled through my small jewelry box, my fingers finding the familiar thin piece of metal. I crept to the door and listened. I could hear the faint sound of the television downstairs. He was settling in for the night, confident his prisoner was secure. I slid the bobby pin into the lock. My hands were shaking, but I forced them steady. After a few tense, heart-stopping seconds, I heard a faint click. The lock was open. I prepared my small bag again, moving with silent urgency. I took the few dollars I had saved from birthdays, a small photo of my mother and father from before the world broke, and the precious, terrible evidence, the letters and the photographs of the other girls. They were my only weapon. But where could I go? Mrs. Davis's house was the first place he would look. The bus station was miles away, an impossible distance to cover on foot in the middle of the night without being seen. I was trapped in this town. Then, like a flash of lightning, an idea struck me. The letter, the one he'd been holding, Aunt Kathleen's letter to Mrs. Davis. He had it, and it had her address on it, my ticket to Chicago, my only hope. I knew he kept all his important papers in the study downstairs. It was an insane risk. I would have to go into the very heart of the monster's lair. But it was the only chance I had. I waited, sitting on my bed, counting the minutes, listening as the sounds of the house slowly died down. I heard him climb the stairs, his footsteps pausing outside my door to check the lock. I held my breath. He moved on, and a few minutes later, I heard the door to the master bedroom close. I waited another hour, an eternity, until the house was utterly still and silent. Around midnight, I slipped out of my room. The hallway was a river of shadows, and I moved through it like a ghost, my bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. I knew every board that creaked, every step that groaned, and I avoided them all. The study was next to the living room. The door was closed, but not locked. I held my breath and turned the knob, wincing at the small click it made in the profound silence. I slipped inside. The room was dark, lit only by the pale moonlight filtering through the thin curtains. His desk was neat and orderly, a reflection of the man himself. I began my search, moving with frantic, silent speed, carefully lifting papers, sliding open drawers, my ears straining for any sound. That's when I heard it. A soft, unmistakable sound right behind me. A breath. My blood turned to ice. I turned slowly, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. A dark silhouette stood in the doorway. "I was waiting for you," Roger said, his voice a low, chilling murmur. "I knew you'd try." He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, turning the key in the lock. The sound echoed in the small space like a death sentence. The situation had just gone from desperate to deadly. "Looking for this?" he asked, and in the dim light, I saw him holding up a small, charred piece of paper. He had burned the letter. Predictable, Deborah. So predictable. He began to advance on me. I backed away until the edge of the desk pressed into my spine. My hands flew behind me, searching blindly for a weapon. My fingers brushed against paper, a pen, and then the heavy, solid base of his brass desk lamp. As he stepped into a shaft of moonlight, I saw something glinting in his other hand. A small pocket knife. "You know," he said, his voice dangerously calm as he flicked the blade open. "A lot of accidents can happen in a house late at night. A disturbed girl, wandering in the dark. She could fall down the stairs. Or maybe," he gestured with the knife, "she could get confused and hurt herself." He was going to kill me. The thought was so stark, so absolute, it almost paralyzed me. He was going to kill me and make it look like an accident or a suicide. My hands tightened around the base of the lamp. "Mrs. Davis knows everything," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Aunt Kathleen knows. If something happens to me, they'll talk." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Who would listen to their fantasies against the grief of a husband who just lost his troubled stepdaughter? It would be a tragedy, but life would go on, for me and your mother at least. He was less than a yard from me now. "This doesn't have to end this way," he said, trying a different tactic. "Just be a reasonable girl. We'll go to the principal tomorrow, you'll clear my name, and everything can go back to how it was." A surge of pure, hot rage burned through my terror. "Back to how it was?" I cried, my voice suddenly loud and strong in the quiet room. "You think I could ever go back? To waiting for Sunday? To seeing that red candle outside my door? You destroyed my life. You made me feel dirty and ashamed, like it was my fault." "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing at the closed door. "You'll wake your mother." "Good," I screamed. "I hope she wakes up. I hope she finally sees the monster she married." He lunged, the knife raised. Just then, we both heard it. A faint creak from the hallway upstairs. Footsteps. "Roger?" My mother's sleepy, confused voice drifted down the stairs. "Is that you?" I heard shouting. For a single, vital second, Roger froze. Panic flashed in his eyes. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't planned for a witness. It was the only chance I would get. With a guttural scream that came from the deepest part of my soul, I swung the heavy brass lamp with all the strength I possessed. It connected with his shoulder and the arm holding the knife. He roared in pain and surprise, staggering backward. The knife clattered to the floor. At that exact moment, the study door opened. My mother stood on the threshold, her eyes wide with shock. She took in the scene in an instant, me, Panting and wild-eyed, Roger, clutching a bleeding gash on his arm, the broken lamp and the gleaming knife on the floor. "What is going on in here?" she cried. Roger recovered instantly. "Brenda," he said, his voice laced with false pain. "Thank God it's Deborah. She's out of control. I found her snooping in my desk, and when I confronted her, she attacked me with the lamp." My mother looked at me, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "Deborah? Is that true?" This was it, the moment of truth. "No!" I screamed, tears of rage and frustration streaming down my face. "He's lying! Mom, he hurts me. He does terrible things to me every Sunday when you go to church. The red candle, Mom, he puts it outside my door, and then he... My voice broke. "And you knew. I found your letters. You suspected, and you did nothing." The color drained from my mother's face. For a long, silent moment, the world seemed to stop. She turned to Roger, her eyes searching his for an answer. "What is she talking about, Roger?" He scoffed, trying to maintain his composure. "Brenda, you can't possibly believe these sick fantasies. The girl is disturbed. She needs a doctor." My mother hesitated, her gaze darting between us. I could see the war raging inside her, the conflict between the comfortable lie and the horrifying truth. "The red candles," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw a box of them in your desk drawer. You told me they were for your private prayers." The panic in his eyes was back. "They are. Brenda, you can't think that I would—" "The knife," she continued, her voice gaining strength, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Why do you have a knife, Roger? What were you going to do to my daughter?" His mask of the concerned husband dissolved completely, replaced by a snarl of pure venom. "Your daughter," he hissed. "Your precious, ungrateful daughter who is trying to destroy everything we have? Who wants to send you back to the gutter I pulled you out of?" "Answer me," my mother insisted, and in her voice I heard a steel I hadn't heard in years. "What were you going to do?" He looked from her to me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes as he realized the game was up. "Nothing she didn't provoke herself," he spat. That was it, the veiled confession. My mother flinched as if he had struck her. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "My God," she whispered. "It's true. All of it." He tried to backtrack, his voice becoming pleading. "Brenda, I did it for us, to keep our family safe. We can't let her tear us apart." I held my breath, terrified that her fear of poverty would win out. But something had finally broken in her, and something new and strong had taken its place. She looked at him, her eyes clear and cold. "Get out of my house," she said, each word precise and final. "Get out now, or I swear to God I will call the sheriff." His face twisted into a final, ugly mask of rage. "You foolish woman. You'll be begging on the streets within a month." "Maybe," my mother said, "but I think the police will be very interested in hearing from the other girls." "What other girls?" he stammered. "The ones in the photographs," I said, my voice clear and steady, finding strength in my mother's newfound courage. "The ones you took pictures of before me. We have them, Roger. Mrs. Davis has copies. My aunt knows everything. It's over." For the first time, I saw true, abject terror on his face. He knew he was beaten. With a guttural snarl, he lunged for the knife on the floor. My mother shoved me behind her, a fierce, protective gesture I hadn't seen since I was a little girl, but he didn't attack. He just gave us one last look of pure, concentrated hatred, and then he fled, shoving my mother aside as he ran from the room. We heard him race through the house, and then the front door slammed shut, leaving us in a ringing silence. We stood there for a moment, panting, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede. Then my mother turned to me, her face streaked with tears. "Deborah," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby." "What did he do to you? What did I let him do?" She reached for me, and this time I didn't pull away. I collapsed into her arms, and we held each other and cried amidst the wreckage of her new life and my stolen childhood. "I'm sorry," she sobbed over and over. "I'm so sorry." After a few minutes, I pulled back, wiping my eyes. "We have to go," I said, my voice urgent. "He could come back." She nodded, her expression firming with a new resolve. "You're right. Get your things. Just what you need." "Where will we go?" I asked. "To your Aunt Kathleen," she said without a moment's hesitation. "She was right about him all along. I have a lot of apologizing to do." In the dead of night, my mother and I packed 2 small bags, our movements swift and silent. As we slipped out the front door into the cold, dark street, I took one last look at the house that had been my prison. We were leaving everything behind, stepping out into an unknown, uncertain future. But for the first time in a very long year, I wasn't scared. We were leaving the monster behind, and we were doing it together. The first bus out of town left before dawn. My mother and I sat in the back, 2 small bags at our feet, watching the familiar streets of our town slip away into the pre-dawn gloom. The rhythmic hum of the engine was the only sound between us. We didn't speak. What was there to say? Every word felt both inadequate and overwhelming. I watched my mother's reflection in the dark glass of the window. She looked older than I had ever seen her, the lines of worry and regret etched deeply into her face. She had finally chosen me, but the cost of that choice was everything she had. Her home, her security, the fragile peace she had bought at such a terrible price. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, watery light over the Ohio farmland, she finally turned to me. "I'm sorry, Deborah," she whispered, her voice thick with a grief that was years in the making. "I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger. I was so scared after your father died, so lost. I let my fear make me a coward." I looked at the woman beside me, this stranger who was my mother, and I saw not a coward, but a fellow survivor. "We're here now," I said, the words feeling small but true. "We're leaving. That's what matters." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The journey to Chicago felt like a journey to another planet. The city rose up on the horizon, a jagged line of steel and glass that was a world away from our quiet, small-town life. We were 2 anonymous specks in a sea of millions, which was both terrifying and strangely comforting. My mother used a good portion of our dwindling cash on a taxi, too afraid to navigate the confusing maze of city buses. Aunt Kathleen lived in a brick apartment building on the north side of the city. As we climbed the 3 flights of stairs, my heart hammered against my ribs. What would she say? What would she think of this broken mother and daughter showing up on her doorstep? My mother knocked, her knuckles barely making a sound. The door opened, and there she was. My Aunt Kathleen was a few years younger than my mother, but she had a fire in her eyes, a strength that my mother seemed to have lost along the way. Her eyes widened in surprise, and then, as she truly took in our exhausted, desperate faces, they filled with tears. "Brenda," she whispered. "Oh, my dear girl. Deborah." There were no other words. She pulled us both into a fierce, tight hug and guided us inside her small apartment as if she were afraid we might vanish. Her home was nothing like Roger's. It was smaller, a little cluttered, but it was filled with books and colorful paintings and the warm, welcoming scent of coffee. It was the home of a woman who lived life on her own terms. It was a safe harbor. "You ran," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I got the letter from your teacher. I was about to drive down there and get you myself." In the safety of her bright, cheerful kitchen, over cups of hot, sweet tea, the whole story came tumbling out. We told her everything, from the first Sunday to the final, violent confrontation in the study. As we spoke, Aunt Kathleen's face grew harder, her eyes colder. "I told you," she said finally, her voice low and tight with anger, directed at my mother. "I told you there was something wrong with that man. I saw it in his eyes." My mother finally broke down completely, her face crumpling in shame. "I know," she sobbed, "and I pushed you away. I chose him over my own sister, over my own daughter's safety. How can you ever forgive me?" "The past is the past," Kathleen said, her voice softening as she looked at me. "What matters is you're here now. And you," she said, her gaze finding mine. "You, Deborah, are braver than you will ever know. You fought back. You saved yourself." The next few days were a blur. Aunt Kathleen was a force of nature. She had already been in contact with a lawyer, a kind, serious man named Mr. Abramson, who specialized in family law. We met with him in his office downtown. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his expression growing more and more grim. When I showed him the letters and the photographs of the other girls, his face hardened. "This is very serious," he said, "and you did the right thing by coming here. This will be difficult, but I will be with you every step of the way." A few days after we arrived, we got a call from Mrs. Davis. The news made my blood run cold. Roger, in a fit of rage, had gone to the school and tried to have her fired, accusing her of filling my head with lies. But the principal, a man I had always feared, had his own suspicions about Roger. He didn't believe him. Instead, he called the sheriff. Roger had fled before they arrived. He was now officially a fugitive. The knowledge that he was out there, hunted but free, was terrifying. For the next week, we lived in a state of heightened alert. We kept the door double-bolted. Every footstep in the hall made me jump. The freedom I had just tasted felt fragile, threatened by the long shadow he still cast over my life. One afternoon, about a week after we arrived, there was a knock on the door. Aunt Kathleen looked through the peephole. "It's the police," she said, her voice filled with relief. She opened the door to two detectives. "We have news about Roger Nelson," the woman detective said gently, after they had sat us down in the living room. "We located him this morning at a motel near the bus station." She paused and took a breath. "He had a gun, and he had this address." He had found us. He had come to finish what he started. A wave of ice-cold terror washed over me, and I gripped my mother's hand. "There was a struggle during the arrest," the male detective continued. "He resisted violently. He was wounded. He's at the hospital now, under police guard." The room was silent. He was caught. He was wounded. He couldn't hurt us anymore. The monster was finally in a cage. "Will he live?" my mother asked, her voice a thread. "The doctors think so," the detective replied. "But it doesn't matter. With the evidence you've provided and the testimony from the other girls we've now identified thanks to those photographs, he will be going to prison for a very, very long time." It was over. It was really, truly over. The months that followed were a new kind of difficult. The trial was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I had to stand up in a cold, formal courtroom and tell my story to a room full of strangers. I had to look at Roger, sitting there beside his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing in a prison jumpsuit, but his eyes were filled with the same cold, calculating hatred. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled, but I looked at my mother, my aunt, and Mrs. Davis, who had driven all the way to Chicago to be there for me. Their faces gave me strength. I told the truth. I spoke for myself and for the other girls in the photographs who were too scared to speak for themselves. His lawyer tried to paint me as a liar, an unstable girl looking for attention. But the evidence, the letters, the photographs, was undeniable. Roger himself took the stand and, with sickening sincerity, tried to claim he had loved me like a daughter and that I had betrayed his kindness. That's when the rage I had felt in the study returned. I stood up, ignoring the frantic whispers of our lawyer. "Lies!" I shouted, my voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "My nightmares aren't lies. The girls in your photographs, did they lie too? You thought you were untouchable, but you were wrong. We are not afraid of you anymore." He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison, a severe sentence for the time. As the judge read the verdict, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It wasn't the end of my pain, but it was the beginning of justice. Healing isn't a straight line, is it? It's a spiral. You think you've moved on, and then a smell, a sound, the flicker of a candle, brings you right back to the darkest moments. But each time you spiral back, you come out of it a little faster, a little stronger. I'm sure some of you know exactly what I mean. We stayed in Chicago. Aunt Kathleen wouldn't have it any other way. Her small apartment became our home. My mother, for the first time in her adult life, got a job, working as a seamstress in a small tailor shop. I watched her slowly regain her confidence, her independence. The fragile bond between us began to heal through long talks and shared tears. She became the mother I had lost, and I, the daughter she had almost failed. Inspired by the unwavering belief of Mrs. Davis, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I finished high school with honors and went to college. I became a teacher. I wanted to be for other children what Mrs. Davis had been for me, a safe place, a listening ear, a light in the dark. It was at school that I met Larry, a kind-eyed math teacher with a patient smile. It took me a long time to learn to trust again, to believe in the goodness of a man. But Larry was patient. He gave me time and space, and slowly, carefully, he helped me put the broken pieces of my heart back together. We married on a sunny afternoon in a small ceremony filled with the few precious people who had saved my life. Becoming a mother myself was a profound, complex journey. Holding my own son, and later my daughter, I felt a love so fierce it was terrifying. With that love came a new understanding of my own mother's fear, and with that understanding, a deeper, more complete forgiveness finally bloomed. I promised my children and myself that I would always listen, always see, and that no fear would ever be more important than their safety. Roger died of a heart attack in prison 15 years into his sentence. When I heard the news, I felt no joy, no hatred, just a quiet sense of an old, ugly chapter finally closing for good. The years went on. My children grew up, strong and kind. My mother and Aunt Kathleen mended their sisterhood and grew old together, two strong women who had found their way back to each other through the storm. I taught for 40 years, but I also did something else. I started a small, informal support group in my living room for women who had survived abuse, one of the first of its kind. I wanted to create a space where the silence could be broken, where shame could be turned into strength. Today, at 83, I look back on a life that was broken in two. There was the life before Roger and the life after. I carry the scars of what he did, and I always will. The red candle still flickers at the edges of my dreams sometimes. But it no longer has the power to burn me. It's just a shadow, a reminder of the darkness I walked through to get to the light. The true victory wasn't the prison sentence. The victory was the life I built afterward. The love I found with Larry, the joy of my children and grandchildren, the hundreds of students I was privileged to teach. The victory is in not being defined by my wounds, but by my choices. Thank you for listening to me today, for allowing me to share with you this intimate chapter of my life. If my story has touched you, please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to discover other testimonies like mine. And please share it, because who knows? Maybe someone going through a similar trial right now will find the courage to keep searching, to hope, to believe in the impossible. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me.